The moment it all went wrong, one flight, one decision, and a countdown nobody on board could see. 13 hours in the air, a routine arrival, until the storm stopped moving, holding over Singapore, fuel burning, options shrinking. Singapore 319. Changi is now closed. The destination disappears, but the aircraft keeps circling. Every minute feels safe. Every minute destroys the margin. They could divert. They should divert. But hope is louder than logic. This wasn't panic. This was something worse. Fuel drops below final reserve. Now they are flying on survival fuel. We're into final reserve. Singapore 319. Fuel emergency. Diversion through violent weather. Runway barely visible. 3 approaches. 3 failures. Each climb burns what they don't have. 1,000 kilograms remaining. No more safe options. No backup plan. No extra attempt. Only one last chance. The storm didn't almost destroy Flight 319. One decision on which many people's lives depended. No fuel left. The words were not shouted. They were calculated. High above Singapore, Flight 319 traced another slow circle in the darkening sky. Lightning tore through massive storm clouds below. On the weather radar, the screen was almost solid red. Fuel was dropping. Time was shrinking. And the runway lights of Singapore Changi Airport were invisible behind sheets of rain. How did a routine long-haul flight end up here, counting kilograms instead of minutes? To understand that, we have to go back 12 hours. Back to London. Back to a decision that made perfect sense. At Heathrow Airport, nothing felt dramatic. The aircraft, a Boeing 777, stood ready for departure. Passengers boarded calmly. Crew moved with practiced precision. Weather reports showed thunderstorms over Singapore. Not unusual, not extreme. In Southeast Asia, storms build fast and collapse just as fast. The captain had seen it countless times. Fuel planning followed strict rules. Trip fuel, contingency fuel, alternate fuel, final reserve. Everything required by regulation was on board. Adding extra fuel was optional. Optional fuel increases weight. Weight increases burn. Burn increases cost across 13 hours of flight. Airlines operate on margins measured in percentages. The numbers were reviewed twice. The flight was legal, safe, within limits. The captain made a rational decision. No additional discretionary fuel. It was not reckless. It was disciplined. And at that moment, entirely correct. Flight 319 pushed back into the gray London afternoon and climbed toward cruising altitude. Behind them, certainty. Ahead, routine. Or so it seemed. Hours later, as the aircraft approached Singapore airspace, updates began to change the picture. The storm system was not weakening. It was expanding. Cloud tops climbed higher. Wind reports fluctuated sharply. Arrival traffic slowed. Then came the call from air traffic control. Singapore 319, enter holding. A standard instruction. The aircraft turned into a wide orbit above the sea. Holding patterns are normal, but holding burns fuel. Each circuit erased options. The storm below showed no sign of breaking. Lightning illuminated the clouds from within, like something alive. Inside the cockpit, calculations began again. Fuel remaining. Distance to alternate. Protected final reserve. 3,000 kilograms. Still within limits. But the margin was narrowing. The decision in London had not been wrong. It had been reasonable, logical, professional. But aviation is not decided only by logic. It is decided by time and weather and the unpredictable space between them. As Flight 319 completed another orbit in the storm-dark sky, fuel was no longer just a number on a display. It was opportunity, and opportunity was fading. They were still safe, but they were no longer comfortable. And soon, the airport below would make a decision of its own, one that would turn waiting into a race. Changi closes, and the crew must choose between patience and survival. Singapore 319. Changi is now closed until further notice. The transmission was calm, almost routine, but inside the cockpit, everything shifted. Below them, the lights of Singapore Changi Airport vanished behind sheets of rain. Arrivals were suspended. Departures halted. The runway they had planned for 13 hours no longer existed. Fuel remained, but the destination did not. And the question was no longer when they would land. It was where. Flight 319 continued its orbit in the holding pattern. The storm was no longer scattered cells. It was a solid system. Expect delay. Further updates in 10 minutes. Air traffic control reported 10 minutes. At cruise altitude, 10 minutes are invisible. In holding, 10 minutes are measurable. The first officer recalculated fuel. Trip fuel consumed. Holding fuel decreasing. Alternate fuel protected. Still legal. Still within margins. The logical choice was clear. Divert early. But logic competes with hope. Weather in Singapore is volatile. Storms collapse quickly. The captain had seen airports reopen in minutes. If they diverted now, hundreds of passengers would miss connections. Aircraft rotations would be disrupted. Logistics would unravel. And if Changi reopened moments later, the diversion would look unnecessary. Any estimate on reopening? The captain asked. Negative at this time, ATC replied. Heavy precipitation over the field. Another orbit. Fuel ticked lower. The psychological trap had begun. Not panic, not denial. Something subtler. Continuation. They had planned to land in Singapore. Every system, every calculation, every expectation pointed there. Diverting meant admitting the plan had failed. And the plan had worked perfectly so far. The radar showed intense returns directly over the runway. Wind gust reports climbed higher. Expect extended delay, came the next call. Extended. That word changed the tone. The first officer quietly pointed to the fuel display. Numbers were moving into territory that demanded commitment. If they were to divert to Hang Nadim International Airport, the decision had to be made soon. Not later. Soon. Because once fuel dropped below a certain threshold, waiting would no longer be optional. It would be dangerous. The captain looked at the storm through the windshield. Lightning illuminated cloud towers in violent flashes. He had seen this before. Storms break. Airports reopen. They just needed a little more time. But time was no longer neutral. It was consuming options. Each orbit in the sky narrowed the corridor of safety. The aircraft was still stable. Passengers were unaware. The cockpit remained composed. But beneath the professionalism, pressure was building. The plan was still Singapore. Until it wasn't. Because somewhere between patience and hesitation lies a thin line. And Flight 319 was approaching it. Fuel continued to fall. And soon, waiting would no longer be a strategy. It would be a mistake. Soon the fuel level will drop below the last reserve, and the word emergency will become inevitable. The number changed quietly. 3,000 kilograms. Then 2,990. They had just crossed the final reserve. There was no alarm sound, no flashing red warning, only a small shift on a digital display. But in aviation, that number is sacred. Final reserve fuel is not for planning, not for convenience. It is survival fuel. and Flight 319 had just begun using it. The holding pattern was no longer sustainable. Below them, the storm still swallowed Singapore whole. Runway lights flickered through sheets of rain. Inside the cockpit, the tone changed. The first officer recalculated the diversion profile to Hang Nadim International Airport. Fuel at landing Batam, approaching minimums, he said carefully. The captain stared ahead. If they diverted now, they would arrive tight. If they waited longer, Batam might no longer be reachable within legal limits. Air traffic control transmitted another update. Changi remains closed. No estimated reopening. Silence followed. The first officer spoke again, softer this time. We're into final reserve. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact. The captain knew what it meant. The regulations were clear. Once final reserve is touched, the flight must land without delay. But declaring an emergency carries weight. It triggers reports, investigations, questions. And yet, fuel does not respond to pride. It responds only to physics. The aircraft turned toward Batam. Rain intensified. Wind reports showed instability over the field. They were committed now. Fuel continued to drop. 2,700 kilograms, 2,500. The first officer looked at the projected fuel at landing again. We're below final at touchdown. The margin was gone. They no longer had flexibility, only necessity. The captain picked up the radio. His voice was steady. Batam approach, Singapore 319. A brief pause. Then the word that changes everything. Singapore 319. Fuel emergency. The frequency went silent for a fraction of a second. Then air traffic control responded immediately. Singapore 319, you are cleared direct. You have priority. Priority. Because now it was official. They were no longer managing a delay. They were fighting a clock. Declaring Mayday did not add fuel. It did not clear the weather. It only removed hesitation. The psychological barrier was gone. There was no more waiting, no more hoping, only action. The aircraft descended toward Hang Nadim International Airport through unstable air and heavy rain. Fuel remaining was now measured in minutes. Inside the cabin, passengers felt only mild turbulence. Inside the cockpit, every second mattered. Because even with priority clearance, one thing remained unchanged. They would get only one real chance to land. And the weather over Batam was about to make that chance far more complicated. The runway was finally in sight. Through sheets of rain and shifting gray haze, the lights of Hang Nadim International Airport flickered ahead. They had declared Mayday. They had priority. They had one job left: land. Fuel remaining. Just over 2,000 kilograms. Enough for an approach. Maybe two. But not much more. And the wind was changing. Wind 190 at 22, gusting 30, came the report. That meant tailwind. The Boeing 777 has strict tailwind limits for landing. Exceed them, and stopping distance increases dramatically. Within limits, barely, the first officer calculated. The aircraft descended through heavy rain. Autopilot engaged. Glide slope captured. For a moment, it looked stable. Then the air shifted. The vertical speed spiked. A caution sounded. Unstable. The aircraft drifted above profile. A late correction. Too aggressive. The captain felt it instantly. Too fast. Too high. Go around. Thrust advanced. The engines roared. The aircraft climbed back into cloud. Fuel burned rapidly during climb. Inside the cockpit, no one spoke for several seconds. Second attempt. This time they adjusted earlier. Approach speed corrected. But the storm intensified. Heavy rain distorted visual references. The localizer fluctuated. Autopilot struggled to maintain center line. At 500 feet, another warning. Unstable. The captain hesitated half a second longer than before. That half second felt enormous. Go around. Again. Climb power. Fuel decreasing faster now. 1,600 kilograms. The captain's jaw tightened. 2 missed approaches, each one consuming options. Third attempt. There would not be many more. Rain slammed against the windshield. Wind reports fluctuated again. Tailwind increasing, the first officer said quietly. The captain disconnected the autopilot early. Manual control. He needed to feel the aircraft. The controls felt heavier in turbulence. The glide path dipped. He corrected. Airspeed fluctuated. Watch speed. 400 feet. The runway lights appeared through rain. Then blurred. Sink rate. Another warning. The approach was unstable again. Too much descent. Too much correction. For a brief second, the captain considered forcing it down, ignoring the criteria. But training overrode fear. Go around. The words tasted different this time, desperate. The engines spooled up again. The aircraft climbed, fuel remaining, just above 1,000 kilograms. Silence filled the cockpit. They had burned through their buffer. There would be no fourth standard attempt. 3 approaches, 3 failures, each one correct, each one costly. The captain stared at the fuel display. 1,050 kilograms. That was no longer planning fuel. That was countdown fuel. He felt it now. Not panic, but something colder. The realization that physics no longer negotiates. If they missed again, the engines could flame out before another climb was complete. There would be no safe alternate, no extended vector, no delay. Only one final attempt. And this time, it would have to work. Because below them, the runway waited. And above them, the sky was running out. Fuel remaining, 980 kilograms. Less than 10 minutes of usable flight time. The Boeing 777 leveled briefly in the storm above Hang Nadim International Airport. There would be no standard procedure now, no margins, no textbook approach. If they climbed again, the engines might not keep running long enough to try once more. This was no longer about precision. It was about survival. Visual approach, the captain said. No autopilot, no reliance on automated flare logic. He needed direct control. Rain distorted the runway lights. Wind pushed laterally across the nose. Fuel ticked lower. 900 kilograms. The first officer read wind corrections calmly, but his voice carried strain. Correcting left. Watch drift. The captain flew slightly higher than ideal trading precision for stability. They would accept a firm landing. They would not accept another go-around. At 700 feet, turbulence shook the aircraft. The airspeed fluctuated. He resisted the instinct to overcorrect. Small inputs, measured, deliberate. Below them, the runway threshold emerged through rain. Clear enough, close enough. Fuel, 720 kilograms, 500 feet. Manual thrust adjustments. Crosswind from the right. The aircraft drifted. He countered with rudder and bank. 300 feet. The ground rushed upward faster than it should. Slightly high, the first officer warned. The captain lowered the nose gently, not aggressively. No abrupt movements. 200 feet. The rain intensified. For a fraction of a second, the runway blurred. He kept flying the numbers in his head. 100 feet. Retard. The engines spooled back. The aircraft sank. There was no room for perfection. Only contact. The wheels struck the runway firmly. Not smooth, but solid. Spoilers deployed. Reverse thrust engaged. The engines roared one last time. The aircraft decelerated through heavy spray. Fuel remaining, just under 500 kilograms. Had they gone around again, the climb may not have been possible. The runway lights streaked past, then slowed, then stopped, then silence. For several seconds, neither pilot spoke. Rain hammered against the cockpit windows. The first officer looked at the fuel display again. 480 kilograms, less than what many aircraft burn during taxi. The captain exhaled slowly. They had not run out, but they had come closer than anyone on board would ever know. Outside, emergency vehicles followed at a distance. Inside the cabin, passengers applauded softly, unaware of the arithmetic that had nearly ended differently. Later, investigators would analyze timelines, fuel logs, weather data. They would not find recklessness. They would find something more human. Plan continuation bias. The powerful instinct to continue with the original plan, even as conditions change. The captain's decision in London was rational. Waiting and holding was understandable. But small delays accumulate. Hope extends timelines. And fuel does not negotiate with optimism. Flight 319 landed safely. No injuries, no damage. Just 500 kilograms separating routine from catastrophe. And in aviation, sometimes the most dangerous words are not spoken in panic. They are spoken calmly at the beginning. It should clear soon. Rain continued to strike the cockpit windows as the engines wound down to silence. Neither pilot moved for a moment. The fuel display glowed faintly. 480 kilograms. The captain removed his headset slowly, hands still tense. The first officer exhaled, a breath he had been holding for minutes. Outside, blue lights flashed through the rain. Inside, there was only quiet.